On a busy intersection in the heart of the city, traffic roared and people hurried, each lost in their own world. Jackson, a middle-aged black man, sat in his worn-out manual wheelchair, waiting patiently to cross the street. Life hadn't been easy for him. He'd lost the use of his legs in a car accident years ago, but he never let that break his spirit. He rolled through each day with a quiet strength, smiling at strangers, and always making the best of what he had, even when life was at its toughest. Jackson lived alone in a modest apartment, tucked in a corner of a neighborhood often overlooked by the city's growth and development. His days were simple. He spent mornings at the park, afternoons volunteering at a local community center, and evenings reading books or listening to music in his small, cozy living room. Despite his circumstances, Jackson was known by his neighbors for his positive attitude and his willingness to help others. One afternoon, as he wheeled himself toward the main street, Jackson noticed an elderly woman standing at the corner of a busy intersection. She was holding onto her handbag tightly, glancing nervously at the oncoming traffic. Her name was Mrs. Everett, a widow who lived in a quiet part of town and rarely ventured out alone. She had come downtown for an appointment and now found herself stranded, unsure of how to navigate the chaotic crosswalk. Without a second thought, Jackson rolled closer to her. "Ma'am, would you like some help crossing the street?" he asked, his voice gentle and reassuring. Mrs. Everett looked down at Jackson, surprised to see someone offering assistance, especially when she knew how hard it was for him to get around. She hesitated for a moment, embarrassed at needing help, but the sincerity in Jackson's eyes put her at ease. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said softly. "I'm not as quick on my feet as I used to be." Jackson positioned himself beside her, and together they waited for the light to change. "Just hold on to my chair, and we'll get across safely," he said with a warm smile. As the light turned green, Jackson wheeled forward, matching his pace with Mrs. Everett's slow, careful steps. It wasn't easy navigating the uneven pavement, but Jackson's steady presence gave her the confidence to keep moving forward. As they reached the other side, Mrs. Everett sighed in relief and squeezed Jackson's shoulder. "Thank you so much, dear. You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. Jackson simply nodded. "It was no trouble at all, ma'am, just glad to help," he replied, then continued on his way, expecting nothing in return. He had always believed that kindness should be given freely, especially in a world where it often seemed in short supply. What Jackson didn't know was that someone else had been watching the entire scene unfold. Across the street, sitting inside a sleek black car, was Logan Sutter, a wealthy businessman known for his sharp mind and busy schedule. Logan was in town for a series of high-profile meetings and rarely had time for anything outside his work. But today, as he glanced out the window of his car, something about Jackson's act of kindness caught his attention. Logan had always been a man of action, driven by goals and deadlines. He wasn't the type to slow down or take notice of everyday moments. But seeing Jackson, a man who clearly had his own challenges, go out of his way to help someone else struck a chord deep within him. As the car moved slowly through traffic, Logan kept his eyes on Jackson, watching him wheel away with quiet determination and grace. Intrigued, Logan instructed his driver to follow Jackson discreetly. They watched as Jackson maneuvered his way through the city's crowded sidewalks, struggling up steep ramps and navigating cracks in the pavement. It was clear that Jackson's wheelchair was old and in poor condition, making his journey all the more difficult. Despite this, Jackson moved with purpose, never once showing signs of frustration or complaint. Eventually, Jackson arrived at his apartment building, a modest structure that had seen better days. Logan took note of the address, his mind already racing with thoughts of how he could help. He admired Jackson's quiet resilience and the way he extended kindness without any expectation of reward. For Logan, who had spent years in boardrooms and business meetings, this small act of generosity was a reminder of the humanity that often gets lost in the race for success. Over the next few days, Logan couldn't shake the image of Jackson helping Mrs. Everett. He found himself thinking about the power of small gestures and how they could ripple out, touching lives in unexpected ways. Inspired, Logan decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time. He wanted to give back. not through a corporate donation or a flashy charity event, but in a personal and meaningful way. On a sunny afternoon, Jackson was at home reading when he heard a knock on his door. He wheeled himself over and opened it to find Logan standing there, flanked by two men holding a brand new, state-of-the-art electronic wheelchair. Jackson's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at the sleek, modern chair equipped with features that would make his daily life so much easier. "Hello, Jackson," Logan greeted, extending his hand. "My name is Logan Sutter. You don't know me, but I saw what you did for Mrs. Everett the other day." Logan continued, his tone sincere. "You didn't do it for praise or recognition, and that's what makes it so special. I've been fortunate in life, and I've learned that sometimes the best way to pay it forward is to help those who help others. This chair is for you. I hope it makes your life a little bit easier." Jackson was stunned. For a moment, he couldn't find the words. He had never expected anyone to notice his small act of kindness, let alone respond in such a profound way. Tears welled up in Jackson's eyes as he touched the new wheelchair, overwhelmed by the generosity of this stranger. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say," Jackson finally managed, his voice choked with emotion. "You didn't have to do this," Logan smiled, shaking his head. "I know I didn't have to, but sometimes, the people who deserve kindness the most are the ones who give it freely, without asking for anything in return." Jackson carefully transferred himself into the new chair, feeling the smooth, effortless movement as he navigated his living room. It was a world of difference from his old, worn-out wheelchair, and he couldn't help but smile at how much easier his life would be now. He looked up at Logan, who simply nodded, as if to say that no thanks were necessary. Logan left quietly, not wanting to make a fuss, content in knowing that he had made a real difference. As the days passed, Jackson found himself thinking often about that moment at the crosswalk. He had helped Mrs. Everett because it was the right thing to do, even when his own journey was filled with challenges. And now, because of that one small act, his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, has a way of coming full circle. Sometimes, the smallest actions ripple out in the most unexpected ways, touching lives beyond our own. Jackson continued to live his life much as he had before, but now with an added sense of hope and a deeper belief in the power of human connection. In a world that often feels divided, kindness remains the quiet thread that ties us all together. And for Jackson, Logan, and Mrs. Everett, that thread had woven a story that none of them would ever forget.